Is Australia's house crisis solely the result of the lack of supply, or are there other forces at work? Join us as we uncover the complexities behind this nationwide dilemma, from soaring property prices to affordability challenges. We'll examine the various factors contributing to the crisis, from supply and demand dynamics to government policies. Let's shed light on the underlying causes driving Australia's housing crisis together. How unprecedented is this degree of housing affordability? Does it jeopardize Australia's future? In the 1990s, Andre explains, the typical Australian saved just 7 years for a home down payment, with ownership peaking at 71% in 1966. Yet today, only 40% of adults aged 25 to 34 own property. Among lower-income young people, an alarming mere 28% do. Now it requires around 12 painstaking years for most to scrape together a deposit. Globally, Australian cities rank among the top 10 least affordable. By multiple measures, the nation's housing has skyrocketed to stratospheric, vastly outpacing incomes. Quadrupling in cost over decades, homes now soak up to 2 times more of buyers' pay, indicative of a bubble soon to burst. What key factors inflated Australia's housing bubble over the past decade? Andre blames global central bank moves to slash interest rates after the Great Recession, hoping to stimulate growth by encouraging lending and investment. In Australia, these rock-bottom rates instead primarily enabled property investors to outbid potential residents. As speculative activity grew, policymakers further dropped rates during 2020's COVID-induced recession. Since then, national home prices have ballooned an incredible 33%. Yet now rate hikes aim to tame inflation, locking out first-time buyers as existing owners cling to properties with older, lower-rate mortgages. Unable or unwilling to sell, supply tightens amid still strong demand, provoking immense affordability pressures. How do long-entrenched Australian tax policies favor housing speculation? Andre argues that peculiar Australian tax rules have further subsidized property investing since 2000. Capital gains tax discounts mean investors selling properties after 12 months pay just half the standard tax rate, amounting to strong incentives for quick flips. Even more impactful, negative gearing provisions allow deducting rental property losses against investors' other taxable income. This enables major savings by offsetting paper losses like depreciation rather than actual out-of-pocket spending on expenses like maintenance. Critics assert these two policies have lured deep-pocketed investors to snatch up homes as rentals, thus limiting supply for potential owner-occupants. Australia's tax code ends up indirectly promoting market distortion. Younger and less prosperous Australians clearly suffer most, increasingly priced out of home ownership even as their parents and grandparents enjoyed rates double or triple current ones. Among seniors, nearly half now renting already live in poverty thanks to housing costs eating fixed retirement income. Even median income workers often must skip meals or heating to pay spiking rents. Younger citizens blame older generations and policymakers for runaway housing inflation combined with largely stagnant wage growth. Intergenerational tensions surge. Why does demand concentrate intensely in Australia's densest urban areas? Andre explains how fully 80% of Australia's economic production occurs on a minuscule 0.2% of its land area, clustered in the downtowns of immense cities like Sydney and Melbourne. This density powers immense innovation and productivity as firms pay premiums for access to specialized workers, suppliers, and customers. Urban concentration also drives the underlying land itself to soar in value, but with finite urban space meeting infinite demand for centrally located addresses, astronomical rents and sale prices result. Lofty housing costs in turn exclude less affluent residents from Australia's premier economic hubs. If land lies at the crux of modern wealth creation, how can public policy respond constructively? In Andrea's view, economists must return land to prominence when modeling economic forces, since its scarcity and location nation now critically determine prosperity, with advanced economies witnessing land appreciate to constitute 80% of asset price increases. Reformers suggest directly taxing it, cracking down particularly on vacant investor-owned urban sites. Australia must also fix NIMBYist obstacles to increasing housing stock, presently sustaining just 400 homes per 1,000 occupants. Billionaires like Bill Gates stealthily grabbing farmland highlights elite awareness of land's enduring value even as it squeezes ordinary citizens. What proactive solutions should younger, non-wealthy Australians consider absent sweeping reforms? While justified anger simmers at older generations and politicians perceived as rigging the system, Andre urges pragmatic adaptations by individuals locked out. Whether pursuing training for higher-paying careers, relocating where house remains at least somewhat affordable, or other creative workarounds, he says young people must focus energy on self-reliance rather than just lamenting their plight. Combining policy reform, increased housing supply, and prudent personal financial decisions seems the only way forward for Australians hoping to salvage economic mobility dreams, at least until prevailing economic ideologies shift or sufficient new units get constructed. The limited number of property owners will continue capturing outsized gains, updating flawed theoretical models, now largely ignoring land's essential role, looks necessary to avoid even more unequal futures. How have specific Australian tax policies further encouraged housing speculations at the expense of community stability? Andre explains that since 2000, capital gain tax discounts have encouraged investors to flip properties in under 12 months. They pay just half the standard tax rate on profits. Even more impactful, negative gearing provisions let investors deduct losses on rentals from their overall taxable income. Critics allege these two policies have lured deep-pocketed investors to snap up limited housing supply as rentals rather than residences. Australia's own tax code ends up subsidizing market distortion. Does Australia's current housing crisis have historical precedents on this scale? Andre says, absolutely not. Just 30 years ago, the average Australian saved 7 years before home ownership. By 1966, rates peaked at 71% nationwide. Yet today, only 40% of adults aged 25 to 34 and 28% of low-income young people own homes. A deposit now requires around 12 grinding years to build. Globally, Australian cities hold 3 of the top 10 slots for worst affordability. Housing quadrupled in price over generations while incomes merely doubled. Definitive bubble characteristics portending trouble. Andre spotlights global central banks slashing interest rates to nearly zero by 2010s, hoping easy money would spur economic growth after the financial crisis. In Australia, it primarily enabled property investors to shut out would-be resident owners from the market. As speculative activity accelerated, the government doubled down on cheap rates during 2020's COVID recession, sending national prices up an incredible 33% since then. But now, rate hikes combat inflation, locking out first-time buyers as current owners refuse to relinquish properties with older, lower-rate mortgages. Unable or unwilling to sell, supply keeps tightening amid strong demand, heightening extremes. How have specific Australian tax policies further encouraged housing speculations? Andre explains that since 2000, capital gains tax discounts encourage investors to flip properties in under 12 months. They pay just half the standard tax rate on profits. Even more impactful, negative gearing provisions let investors deduct losses on rentals from taxable income. Critics allege these twin policies have lured deep-pocketed investors to snatch up limited housing supply classify as rentals rather than residences. Australia's own tax code ends up subsidizing market distortion. The young and less affluent clearly suffer most, increasingly unable to build home equity like previous generations did. Among senior renters, almost half now live in poverty, housing costs consuming their fixed retirement income. Even median income earners skip basic needs to afford rent. Intergenerational resentment simmers, youth blaming older Australians and policymakers for runaway housing inflation against stagnant wage growth. Inequity looks poised to intensify further. Why does Australian housing demand cluster overwhelmingly in the largest cities like Sydney? Andre notes that fully 80% of Australia's economic output occupies just 0.2% of its land. The urban cores of immense metropolises like Sydney. Density delivers innovation, firms paying premiums for skilled talent, suppliers, and customer access. But urban concentration also rockets land values beyond reach. With finite space meeting infinite demand for central addresses, rents and sale prices soar, facing ordinary residents to distant peripheries. Andre spotlights global central banks slashing interest rates to nearly zero by 2010s, hoping easy money would spur economic growth after the financial crisis. In Australia, it primarily enabled property investors to severely outbid potential resident owners. As speculative activity accelerated, the government doubled down on rock-bottom rates during 2020's COVID recession, sending national prices up an incredible 33% since then. But now rate hikes combat inflation, locking out first-time buyers as current owners refuse to sell properties with older, lower-rate mortgages. Tightening supply amid still strong demand intensifies the extremes. As we wrap up our exploration into the factors driving Australia's housing crisis, it's clear that this issue requires a multifaceted approach to address. If you found this discussion informative and want to stay updated on housing developments and economic issues, don't forget to hit that like button below and subscribe to our channel. Your support enables us to continue shedding light on important topics affecting our communities. Feel free to share your thoughts and insights in the comment section. Together, let's work towards finding solutions to Australia's housing challenges. Thank you for watching.